again. So for someone that's pretty blind, that's me, I'm pretty blind, looking is something that is important to me. Now, who here grew up in Australia? Just Kendall. Does anyone know who this guy is? Cristiano knows who he is. So this is Mr. Squiggle. Now, interestingly, this year is the 60th anniversary, and there's a $2 coin for Mr. Squiggle out. And I found one this week, and I went, oh, I didn't know that, so it was good timing. Although this one doesn't have Mr. Squiggle on it, it has Gus. Gus is a snail with a television on his shell. So, Mr. Squiggle, what was Mr. Squiggle about? So I really loved this show when I was growing up, and it really inspired in me an interest in art and drawing and things like this. So we used to do these things where you would draw like a few lines, and it was called a squiggle, and then you would try and make a picture out of those lines. Does anyone know that activity? Or there you go. Well, this is where it comes from. So Mr. Squiggle would get he would go off on moonwalks, something else that I can resonate with. And he had a complaining chalkboard, so you can see the legs behind the chalkboard, and this chalkboard used to complain a lot. And then Mr. Squiggle would come and he would draw with his nose. So kids would send in a squiggle and he would draw and fill in this picture, but you could never tell what it was. And then Miss Jane, who's this lady, she would go, but what is it? And he goes, it's upside down, Miss Jane. And that was the big punchline. And so she'd turn it upside down and you'd see this picture really clearly. So it was really cool, and it was always like, oh wow, how did they do that? So for me, I used to love this. It made me look beyond things. I wanted to always see things differently, and I really came to appreciate art. And I found a book at home about contemporary art, and there was really strange things people do, like cover an island in cloth. Like, what's that? But I used to really just go, wow, what is this? And so that really inspired me an interest in art. And it transformed how I see. Then when I was about 12, I started getting older, and this artist named M.C. Escher, does anyone know this artist? Have seen these drawings? So he really twists your perspective, and all of a sudden, up is down, and up is straight, and down is up, and it's just mind-bending. And he just plays with perspective. But when you look at it, it looks like it makes sense until you really see what's going on. So this really started to increase my interest in looking at things in a different way. And I've always been interested in seeing things that I've never seen before. And then there was, when I was in my teens, I started finding an interest in what they call surreal art, and so this artist is Salvador Dali, and he really takes things beyond in this kind of dreamy kind of context. So if you look, it looks like some trees, but if you look again, there's some elephants there, and a swan, and it's just really unusual. And in the clouds actually is a matador, but it's sort of a reference to another thing that he did. So what I love about this is you see things that you don't normally see anywhere else, or you see things that you see everywhere, but you look at them in a new way. And it really helped me to understand that, the world, we think of things as being mundane, but the most ordinary things can really, when you look at them and try and look at them in a different way, the most ordinary things take on a new perspective. Sometimes we get caught up in our assumptions about what we're looking at, and we just we take a quick glance and we don't really look. So take this for example. Alright, there it is. It takes a minute, doesn't it? It's for real, I think. Anyway, she's very white. So sometimes we look and we just instantly just assume we're looking at what we're looking at, but you have to take a second look. Then on the other hand, some events in our lives happen and it really makes us stop and think about our own lives. And this event happened, 18 years ago now, and who here can remember what they were doing when they saw this? Sorry? College. You remember though, right? It's one of those events. It's like one of those big events. I was asleep and I woke up to go to the bathroom, and my dad was watching on TV and he said, "Look at this." And then when we were looking, the second plane hit the tower, and everyone remembers the second plane hitting the tower, and it's just bizarre. And but it really, sometimes we look and the thing is, this is happening, but we looked at it and going, this can't be real. Sometimes things happen in our lives that we don't want to believe that they're happening. And so today I want to look at a really interesting story, one of the miracles of Jesus that's a little bit different. And if you've ever been frustrated about why God allows you sometimes to suffer or to continue and do the same thing over and over again, then maybe this sermon's for you. So let's open our Bibles, if you have them, and if you don't, use your phone. So Mark chapter 8. Just give you a minute there. So Mark chapter 8 verse 22. And it says, "And then he came to Bethsaida, and they bring a blind man unto him, and besought him to touch him. And he took the blind man by the hand, and led him out of the town. And when he had spit on his eyes, and put his hands upon him, he asked him if he saw aught. And he looked up and said, I see men as trees walking. And after that, he put his hands again on his eyes and made him look up. And he was restored, and he saw every man clearly. And he sent him away to his house, saying, neither go to the town nor tell it to anyone in the town." So this is an unusual, one of those miracles. It's unusual. And you know, Jesus performed a lot of miracles that so they don't always go the way you expect. If you think of the demoniac, you know, why did he send all those demons into the pigs? Or forgiving someone on the sins, someone sins when they ask to be healed. You think, oh, why didn't he just heal them? Or even healing on the Sabbath, which caused a lot of confusion with some of the elders. But it doesn't always happen the way you expect. And I guess that's the main point I want to bring home today is sometimes healing isn't the way you think it's going to be. And it does achieve the same result, but it doesn't always go in the way that you think it will. So what I like about this story is, when I was looking at it, I really found some interesting points. So firstly, I find it interesting that Jesus led him away out of the town by the hand. So he leads him out of the hand, by the hand. Sometimes God needs to move you away from your comfort zone, and sometimes from your community or your environment or your friends. Sometimes he needs to move you away, and he leads you by the hand away from those things in order to heal you. And it may seem like that might be a big test there for some of us to be healed, that Jesus needs to lead us somewhere else. Then, and this is interesting, and I purposely chose the King James Version because it says, the actual phrase is, he says, and when he had spit on his eyes. So some versions talk about him making a poultice or something, but in this one it just says he spits on his eyes. Now, in the West, that's what you say when you're insulting someone. You know, if you spit on someone's eyes, it's an insult. And even even when we read this, it's sort of a bit, oh, he spit on his eyes, you know. And but sometimes it may feel like God is chastening you or chastising you. He might be rebuking you. It feels like that, like spitting on your eyes. It might feel like an insult, but he actually might be helping you. And we're going to come back to this point, but I find it interesting that that Jesus led him by the hand and then did this almost insulting act. And it's like it's a chastisement. Then the next thing happens, and this is what makes this miracle so different, is he performs the miracle and he goes, "What do you see?" And he looks up and he goes, "I see men like trees walking." So it's like he didn't do the job right, isn't it? It's like he didn't. I mean, if Jesus said, "Okay, walk," and the guy falls over and goes, "Okay, wait, I'll just try again. Now try." It seems like that at first glance. But as I studied this, I found it more and more interesting and more parallels, and that's what I love about the Bible. It really makes you look again. It makes you stop and you have to actually read, and then you read it again, and you go, "Wait a second, I've never noticed that before," or it reminds you of something else. So he sees men like trees walking, which is an interesting term, and I'll look at that in a second. And then he says, "And he made him look up," after he healed him the second time, "and then he saw everyone clearly." And then he asked him not to go into the town. So I want to look at this men like trees walking. There's a few verses in the Bible that refer to men as being like trees. And in Psalms chapter 1, the first psalm, and I'll just read the first 3 verses. It says, "Blessed is the man that walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of the scornful." So when we're there, God needs to lead us away from that, doesn't he? "But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law does he meditate day and night. And he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that bring forth his fruit in his season. His leaf shall not wither, and whatsoever he does shall prosper." So it talks about those who allow themselves to be led away from the seat, from sinners or people that are leading you astray, will be like a tree planted by water. Now, there's another verse as well that I want to look at in regards to this statement about trees, in Isaiah 61. And for time, I'll just read them. If you want to go along, you can get there. And Isaiah 61 verse 3. And it talks about, and this is one of those verses that Jesus read out when he first started his ministry. And it says, "To appoint them that mourn in Zion, to give unto them beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness, that they might be called trees of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that he might be glorified." Interestingly, the first part of this verse was, "He has sent me to open the eyes of the blind" as well. So here, these trees of righteousness. It's interesting, sometimes when we're here, we might receive some healing, and we look around and we come to church. Okay, let's just say you've started to find Jesus, and then you come to church and you look at his trees of righteousness and you see falling branches and rotting fruit. He doesn't want us to stop there. He will make us trees of righteousness, but he doesn't want us to look at the trees of righteousness. And I find in this miracle that it's interesting, this man, that was the first thing he saw. And the description was, he sees men like trees. And for some in healing, that may be where you stop. You go, all right, now I can see righteous people around me, and I will just live up to that expectation. and go no further. But sometimes we recognize that actually, you know what, or Jesus in this case recognized, you know what, you're still not seeing the full picture, and he completed the miracle. So straight after this miracle, Jesus then began to open the eyes of the disciples. And really, this is what I think, when I looked at this miracle, I was thinking, why does it stop there? Why does he do it in this two-stage way? But it made me realize there's an audience, right? The people with him, and maybe his healing on this in this way is for a bigger audience, including us. So Jesus began to open the eyes of the disciples, and they had a fixed idea about who Jesus was, and they had a fixed idea about his mission. And they, like everybody else, they thought Jesus came to start an insurrection or a rebellion. And but Jesus wanted to open their minds to even greater truths. So far he'd been leading them gently by the hand away from the ideas that they'd held on to, and occasionally he would even chastise them a little bit to make them see clearer. And so what do you do when you want to see something clearer? You stand back, right? And you try and see the bigger picture. So when I was looking at this verse and I was like thinking, well, what's this about? It's always a good idea to look at what happened before and what happened after, and try and get a bigger perspective. So let's have a look at what happened just before this. So in Mark chapter 8, we read about the healing of the feeding of the 4,000. And this was the second time that Jesus had multiplied food for hungry multitudes, and this time, not long after, they got into a boat, and the disciples were there, and they were thinking, and the Pharisees, of course, had just been tempting Jesus to show more signs, and Jesus was like, forget about it. And then they got into the boat. And it says in I'll start with 14 actually, in Mark chapter 8, verse 14 to 21, it says, "Now the disciples had forgotten to take bread, neither had they in the ship with them more than one loaf. And he charged them, saying, Take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. And they reasoned among themselves, saying, Is it because we have no bread? And when Jesus knew it, he said to them, Why reason ye, because you have no bread? Perceive you not, neither understand? Has your heart been hardened? Is your heart still hard? Having eyes, see you not? And having ears, hear you not? And do you not remember? When I broke the 5 loaves among 5,000, how many baskets full of fragments did you take up? And they said 12. And when the 7 among 4,000, how many baskets full of fragments took ye up? And they said 7. And he said to them, How is it you don't understand? So here they are, they've just been with Jesus. They've seen miracle after miracle, and if they've seen him look after the needs of many. And here they are in a boat, and they go, but we've only got 1 loaf of bread. And then, as soon as they got to the other side, to Bethsaida, which is interestingly, it's in the Hebrew, it means house of fish. So Jesus had already multiplied bread and fish to them, and they're worrying that maybe he can't multiply bread, and he's about to show them a whole house full of fish and of spiritual food. And so they're there wondering about the bread, and Jesus is going, are you blind? And so he goes to heal a blind man in their presence, and he does it in these 2 stages. It's interesting that the disciples they needed to see this miracle twice, with the bread, and they still only saw Jesus. They'd seen so many, and they still saw Jesus, and I think they still misunderstood who he was and just the role that he had. They still didn't see men or Jesus or themselves clearly. So Jesus needed to lead them by the hand and into a confrontation with eye-opening truth. He wanted to steer them away from seeing merely examples of righteous men like trees, because they were seeing the Pharisees, and while Jesus was challenging them, they still had these pictures in their mind of what Jesus was and what he could accomplish. So they needed to see it as much. Now, on the other side of Bethsaida, where the blind man was healed, Jesus then started to open their eyes more and more to who he was. So we, in our care group, we recently went through the whole book of Mark, and we found that over and over again Jesus was saying, don't tell anyone this and don't do that, and he was being very kind of, he wasn't challenging all their ideas about, that they thought he would lead a rebellion, and then he, straight after this miracle, he says to them, you know what? He says, the Son of Man must suffer many things, and he will be rejected by the elders and the chief priests, the scribes, the trees of righteousness, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And then Peter said, that'll never happen, and Jesus rebukes him. And he says, actually, if you say that, then you're listening to Satan. So straight after that, so here Jesus is starting to open their eyes. He wanted them to see more and more of what he was about, and beyond just the trees of righteousness. So, and I'm just going to summarize this story, but in Mark chapter 9, he took them to the Mount of Transfiguration. He took with them Peter, James and John, and he led them up the mountain. So he led them away. Just like he led the blind man out of the town, he led them up to this high mountain. And then they saw that Jesus' clothes became shining, like white, bright white, and then appeared to them Elijah and Moses, and they were talking with Jesus. Now, if ever there's an example of trees of righteousness in the Bible, it's Moses and Elijah, right? And so here they are, and they're there in the presence of Jesus, and they still only see trees. So they start saying, well, oh wow, this is a good thing. And they're like, let's make 3 tents, 3 tabernacles. Now, what does a tabernacle remind you of? The sanctuary, right? And the sanctuary is there because and it represents Jesus. And here they are, they're ready to start 3 new religions. They're still only seeing these trees of righteousness, and then while that's happening, it says, and they were afraid, but then there was a cloud that overshadowed them, and the voice of God came out of the cloud and said, "This is my beloved Son, hear him." And then when they looked around, they saw no man anymore. They no longer saw trees of righteousness, save Jesus only with themselves. Here's where they started to see men clearly. They saw Jesus as who he was. They thought, wow, he is greater than the prophets, and he is on another level. God himself has vouched for him. And I think, how many of us need to see that? When we're wondering about healing, I wonder if we look at examples of people around us and we think, oh, if only I was more like that. But we need to look at Jesus, and I mean, this is such a it seems so unattainable to look at Jesus. So we try to bring down our standard and look at someone maybe we can reach, maybe we can be a little bit more like that. But Jesus actually wants us to look higher. He wants us to see him, and he wants us to follow his example and to be like him. In 2 Corinthians 3, verse 18, it says, "But we all, with open face, beholding as in a glass the glory of the Lord, are changed into the same image from glory to glory, even as by the Spirit of the Lord." So God can do this, and it happens from glory to glory, from from one stage to another. And I think this is part of what Jesus was showing when he healed the blind man in this manner. It was part of a bigger picture, and not only for them but for us as well. Okay, this has done something, Randy. It's okay. Okay. Sorry. So, if you can resonate with the experience of the blind man, then you're in good company. So Jesus, when he heals, he may be healing, he may be doing much more than just healing us. He may be sharing much more with us than just healing. He may be sharing something about his own experience and his own journey as well. When you think about what happened to Jesus on that fateful night when at Gethsemane, he was brought to, he was taken away, led away, just like he led the blind man away from his friends and from his community and from his environment. Jesus too was led away from his friends. In fact, his friends just scattered. He was led away, and then he was spat upon, and they laid their hands on him, and that's the exact expression in Mark chapter 8. It says he spat on his eyes and laid hands on him. He was spat upon. They laid his hands on him. He was chastised, and then in his trial, we see that the righteous men of that time, we see them for who they are. And we see that sometimes they're driven by another power and another force or another motivation. And the religious leaders, the king, the proxy of Caesar in Jerusalem, Pilate, they are such a poor picture of what makes a great man, isn't it? And yet when it happened to Jesus, this same thing, we start to see that actually the righteous example of men isn't enough. And then in his death, we see clearly for the first time, and in his resurrection, we see clearly for the first time that the false accusations of Satan are what we see them for what they are. We see the false uplifting of man into places that aren't true. And we see our condition, that we need a heart transplant, we need a blood transfusion, and we need new eyes. And we see that we fall short, and better yet, we see that God is more graceful and more willing to heal us than we could ever have imagined. And then that's when we truly start to see. You know, when we look through the Bible and we sometimes snigger or have a giggle at how silly the disciples were, or even if you go through the book of Exodus, there's one, and again you just think, couldn't they see? But it's because of God healing them through these stages that we can see. And I think that extends to us as well. When God's healing us in this way, it may be that he has a bigger picture in mind. Not just for you, but for everyone around you and for others. As a church, we have as our heritage the call inspired by the three angels message to look again to the plan of salvation. Because in our history as Christianity, we still didn't have the full picture. Even though we had Jesus now, we know who Jesus was, and we still don't have the full picture. And we've been blessed as a denomination to have an important message to give that came through having another look again at what we've grown up with in the Bible, and we see it with new eyes. In this, Jesus is leading us by our hands. He's leading us to places, and he's leading us to heal others with showing them the source and the creator of the trees. He's leading us to to show others a bigger picture and leading others to see that this is the hour of his judgment. So sometimes we need to keep looking a little bit more higher. Jesus takes us by the hand, and sometimes he chastises us. Sometimes he rebukes us, but we think it's a rebuke, but it's not. He's trying to open our eyes. Healing sometimes happens in a process. Jesus could have healed the blind man outright. He could have just said, "Your eyes are open," but he didn't. And for the privilege of that man, to go through it in this strange way, then we also can have our eyes opened in a greater way. Sometimes the delay in his healing is for a greater benefit, and sometimes we look down on others because they're not yet where we think we are. We look down from our lofty branches at someone who's still struggling, and we misrepresent Jesus when we do that. Because that person may also be going through a process of healing for our benefit. Their weakness may be for our strength, and their weakness may be to motivate you to pray for their strength further and to offer the strength that you believe has been given to you, and in that we become part of that healing process. Sometimes we're brought to a place where we put people on the opposite way. We put people on a pedestal and we think that they're greater than they are. Even in our church, we have some superstar preachers, and we think of them as being righteous men, but they too are going through this same process of healing, and they too are in much as need of Jesus as any of us. And Satan uses this to discourage us, and he's really good at it. Because sometimes we fail to see the forest because of the trees. And so when you think you think your pastor's failed to call you about something, or he's so busy he forgot about you, or if we look at others in light of our own achievements and we look down on others, remember this story, that actually there's a bigger picture here. Sometimes God may leave us in a place at a place in our healing for a while for the benefit of others, and I'm starting to see as well that I think God may heal. He uses his healing to achieve the most benefit to the most amount of people with the simplest action. So that sometimes it may not be the right time to heal someone because there's more people that can benefit through witnessing that healing. So the real point here is when we think that we're falling short, or we think we know that we need more healing, and we all do, we need to look to Jesus. Look again. He's the one who's healing us. He's the new thing. He is the thing that we've never seen. And if you see him, you will never need to measure yourself against anyone else. You'll never need to say, if only I was more like that, because you'll see that Jesus is actually healing you in a unique way, and that he's leading you personally on a journey. When it comes to the church, we often see we see failures all around us, and it can be discouraging when you look for righteousness in the church and you don't see any. I love this verse from Ellen White, and I'll read it here. It says, "The Church of Christ, enfeebled, defective as she may appear, is the one object on earth upon which he bestows in a special sense his love and his regard. The church is the theatre of his grace, in which he delights in making experiments of his mercy on human hearts. The Holy Spirit is his representative, and it works to effect transformation so wonderful that angels look upon them with astonishment and joy. Heaven is full of rejoicing when the members of the human family are seen to be full of compassion for one another, loving one another as Christ has loved them." Isn't that an awesome quote? And sometimes we we have leaders and we think they might need to encourage us more, but where do we ever look to ourselves, and who can we encourage? Sometimes you may feel that you don't know how to do that as well, and that's what church is for. It's here to show you how to share this message of hope with others. And this applies to all of us. We are in the theatre of God's grace, and sometimes we're yet to see the excellent fruit that God plans to draw from his flock, but you should always allow yourself to be surprised, because sometimes it's there in full view and we just can't see it. So when you're discouraged, I would recommend you look to the many examples in here of God leading people, and not just clicking his fingers, but leading them towards greater and greater mercy. And this verse really summarizes the whole message. And if you can come there with me, it's found in Hebrews chapter 12. Because those trees of righteousness, they're there for a reason as well. I don't want to dismiss the good things that God has done for people, but they're there as a witness to point us higher as well. And in Hebrews chapter 12 verse 1 it says, through to verse 2, it says, "Therefore we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us. And let us run with endurance the race that is set before us." Alright. "Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, he has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God." And so I know that Jesus wants to take you by the hand, and he wants to lead you away from something. He wants to lead all of us away from something that isn't helpful to us. And after hearing his gentle rebuke, will you let him continue to heal you and heal your brothers and sisters as well because when we're healed, we give an opportunity for others to be healed as well. Knowing that he has a plan that takes time sometimes, and that may not happen on your schedule, and that through this he might allow us to see the world clearer as well. So we can look to Jesus, who's the author and the finisher of our faith, and he will complete the good work that he started. Now, some of us don't know how we can do that. How can we share Jesus with others? So I actually have, Randy's going to hand this out, this Discovery Bible Reading bookmark. It's a little gift you can take. And it's about how to share Jesus. It really is very simple. Disciples are people that Jesus uses to reach others. So a disciple is a person who is every way becoming more like Jesus. So if you are in this church, then you should be seeking to be a disciple. But it's hard, right? Sometimes we don't feel we have the Bible knowledge, or maybe we don't know how to do that. But this little method is very, very powerful and very effective. And on the back it has how to do a Discovery Bible reading. And it's very simple. Friends meet and they share stories of Jesus. One person prays this prayer: "Dear God, please guide us." It's as simple as that. Open our eyes. Start at the beginning. So find a story, start at the beginning, and read one story at a time. So just read the story, and then maybe read it through a second time, and then recount the story in your own words. And then ask these 5 questions. What was new? What surprises you? What don't you understand? What will you obey or apply? And what will you share with someone this week? And then plan to meet again to read again. And then at the end, just pray: "Dear God, thank you for your word. Help us to follow you." This is so simple. You don't need to have Bible knowledge. You just need to open the Word with people and discuss it. And if you don't belong to a care group, you should try and find a care group, because this is what's happening at care groups. We open the Word, we read a story, and we discuss it. And we hear people's insights, and you'll hear insights from people. Everyone has an insight that you don't have, a perspective that you don't have. And like I said, that's what I love about art, and I love about the Word, is seeing things in a new way. And we can read the Bible, and sometimes it might feel a little bit dry because you're just reading it yourself. Then it's time to start sharing it, because that's when it starts to open up again, and you start to realise, even while you're sharing it, you go, oh, I've never seen that before. And it could be something so simple like this story. And that's what happened with this story. This sermon was inspired by a discussion at our care group, and as I was sharing it, I was like, wow, I've never seen that before. And as you read, you'll have something to share with others. It will give you what you need. So if you understand that God is still healing you, don't be so hard on yourself, but don't sit down either. Reach out to God and ask Him to show you more than just trees. Help Him to show you a picture of the paradise that He has in store for you, and let Him show you Himself, and then you can lead others to Him. So, Father in heaven, Lord, I pray that You'll be our vision, Lord, that we can see You when all else is dark, or when people fail us, that we can look to You, and as You heal us, Lord, that we can be an example of the great works that You can do for us to others, and that we can share with them the simple fact that You have opened our eyes. And Lord, I just pray that You'll be with each of us here, that we can take opportunities to lead others by the hand into a picture of Your glory. And I pray, Lord, also for the food that is before us, and for the hands that have prepared it, and for those that will receive it. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.